Hello and welcome back to Restoration DIY, or if this is your first visit, then it's good to have you here, and in both cases, I hope you enjoy the video. In this episode, I'll be making a bowl from some small mixed timber offcuts cast into a 3-colour epoxy resin mix. So without further ado, let's get into it. The offcuts are all from previous projects. I cut the bigger lumps down on my bandsaw. These were then arranged in no particular order in the casting mould, which I'd pre-waxed so the epoxy wouldn't stick. Originally, the bowl was to have just 2 colours, rose bengal and apple green, but as is the changing nature of this type of project, I decided to add purple, which had some interesting results. So with the colours chosen and the offcuts suitably arranged in the mould, I mixed the epoxy resin, just 2 batches for a start, one of the rose colour and one of the green. As in my previous projects, the 2-part epoxy resin is mixed with 150 grams of part B to 300 grams of part A, always adding part B first. Mixing for 2 minutes, then adding the colour in, then mixed for a further 2 minutes for a total of 4 minutes, as recommended by the manufacturer. With both batches mixed, I made the decision to let them stand. I'm still trying to get to the point where they cure to a level that when added to the casting, they don't mix to blend into one colour. To achieve this, I use a laser thermometer, firstly taking a baseline ambient temp, then measure the resin temp. When it reaches a certain level, I can add them to the mould. At this point, whilst waiting for the resin to part cure, I made the decision to mix the purple batch of resin. I felt there wouldn't be enough contrast between the rose and the green, and I wasn't confident that 2 batches would be enough to fill the mould. I placed the casting into the stainless steel bucket that came with the pressure pot. As you can see, it conveniently catches the overspill of resin and keeps the pot clean. Then I added the now very hot resin, 1 bit at a time. The purple was still relatively cool. The 3 batches filled the mould to the top, and to stop the offcuts floating off the bottom, I added a plastic lid with some weight on top. The resin was now beginning to cure, so I had to get it into the pressure pot to minimise the trapped air bubbles. Once inside, I screwed the lid down and added the now customary 50 to 55 psi and left it overnight. It's the next day and the casting has cured nicely, with no visible cracks. Once removed from the pressure pot, it was easy to release the casting from the mould, and initially the colours looked very nice, though the green had been a bit overpowered by the purple. After a quick check, I marked the centre of the blank and drilled an 8mm hole to mount it to the lathe on the woodworm screw. With the blank safely mounted to the lathe, I could begin turning. First up was the Easywood Tools full-size finisher, and with everything well balanced, I was soon up to a lathe speed of around 1000 RPM. I began by gently exposing the timber offcuts, and whilst doing this, I realised the blank probably didn't have the depth to be a pedestal bowl, so I decided to keep this one simple, with sloping sides down into a flat base with no upstand. I used a skew chisel quite a lot on this one. It helped to keep the side of the bowl flat, and in the next clip, when I stop the lathe, I'm actually pointing at the amount of trapped air bubbles. There were a lot, so I decided to take a bit more off to see if I could get rid of them. That worked, it got rid of most of them, and after a final go with the skew chisel, I could move on to forming the mortise. First job was to level the base. I did this with a combination of the full-size finisher and the skew chisel to blend the base into a slight curve up into the straight side. I marked out a 70mm diameter circle, then I used the thin parting tool to define the outer edge of the recess. This was followed by a 3/8 bowl gouge and the dovetail cutter to remove the inner material. I cut the dovetail into the recess and removed the last piece in the middle before tidying it up with a skew chisel. You may be able to notice I've turned the lathe speed down quite a lot for the last bit. With the tailstock removed, it was wobbling quite badly. For the remaining voids in the outer surface, I mixed up a small amount of fast curing epoxy resin. Once mixed, I used a wooden stick to fill the holes with a bit of masking tape to hold it in place. It took about 10 minutes for the epoxy to cure, then I could use the skew chisel to gently scrape away the excess, which left a more or less invisible repair. Then it was time for sanding from 80 to 3000 grit, followed by a good clean with denatured alcohol, then a single application of sanding sealer. This was denibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad, then I applied a single coat of Yorkshire Grit abrasive paste, which was cleaned away with paper towel. Next up was Mirka Polarshine 10 cutting compound. To begin polishing the resin, cleaned away with more paper towel. To finish the resin polishing process, Polarshine 5. This has been a great addition to finishing my resin projects, and if required, there are many other grades of cutting compound available. The only downside is the price. Though used sparingly, one bottle will do a lot of resin polishing. And to finish, Wood Wax 22. Just one coat applied with a lathe speed turned up slightly to around 1100 RPM to generate plenty of friction to melt the wax into the timber offcuts. If the lathe speed is too low, it leaves tiny pieces of paper towel on the surface. I turned the bowl around and began hollowing out the inside. No big drama here. I took the uneven face off with a 3/8 bowl gouge, then worked from the centre outwards to remove the waste material, leaving a support piece in the middle until most of the excess weight had gone. The gouge works well for removing the excess material, especially when there is a lot of wood mixed in with the resin, but leaving the tailstock in place does restrict access, so eventually I have to resort to the EasyWood Tools full-size finisher to continue hollowing out. The rim needed a bit of attention and I had to remove quite a lot of material to get rid of all the voids. I also decided to slope the top inwards rather than trying to get it flat with the base. A small feature, but I think it looks better that way. I also added a slight radius to soften the outer and inner edges. I continued removing the waste material, paring down the centre support to give better access, but I wanted to make this a fairly lightweight bowl, so I removed the tailstock support so I could remove the centre support altogether, and then I could set to cutting away the remaining resin and wood in the base. Overall, I wanted the side and the base to be around 3/8 of an inch, 10mm thick. With that out of the way, it was just a matter of getting down to the required depth. I kept stopping the lathe to check the thickness, remembering that the mortise cuts quite deeply into the base, so I had to allow for that. It took a while, but eventually I was happy with the overall shape and thickness of the bowl, and in the process I had uncovered some small cracks, but they disappeared as I got to the finished surface. A final bit of work from the large negative rake scraper and carbide cutter to blend and fare the base into the side, and the inside of the bowl was ready for sanding. I sanded from 80 to 3000 grit, then cleaned down with denatured alcohol before applying sanding sealer, which I denuded with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Next was Yorkshire Grit abrasive paste, same as before, just a single coat, cleaned away until the paper towel does not pick up any more residue. Then Polar Shine 10, a single application, cleaned away as before. Followed by Polar Shine 5, another single coat, polished away to leave the resin with a deep shine. And finally, Wood Wax 22, a single coat, cleaned away with paper towel to complete my finishing process. And there we go, another project finished. Sadly, the apple green got lost somewhere on the way to the finish, but the purple and rose bengal contrast well with the yellow hue of the wood, making this one of my favourites so far. I hope you like this one too, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.